I'm Rhoda, and I lead what's called the Learning Experience and Design team at Uber Technologies, specifically for the Community Operations Organization. And what that means is I oversee over 40,000 learners across the globe in different languages, different countries, and cultures. And I'm going to talk about UX and how we applied that to kind of transform our learning experiences and our learning programs for Uber, and really to meet that scale, ultimately. So what is UX design? Does anybody, when I say UX, what do you think of? User experience? Very good. Research. What are some things that you think of when you hear UX? Can you shout it out? Uber experience. Some people say websites, apps. When you do a search for, it's funny, if you try to Google or try to search for what is UX on the internet, there is no defined definition what it is. There is actually no commonly accepted definition because there's so many different disciplines in UX now. There's interaction design, information architecture, usability, human-computer interaction, and it's kind of become this catch-all bucket that's very trendy to say right now. So I'm going to keep it really basic and go with a very simple definition, which is UX design is a process of creating products that provide meaningful and relevant experiences to users. And that's from the Interaction Organization. The really key thing to look at there is it's not just about an instructional design or about the design of the product itself, it's everything. Everything from before you interact with it, so including how you find it, how you access it, how you can get to the product, and everything afterwards. So how do you remember and feel about it afterwards? It's not, so if you think about it in training, what is LX? I think it still applies. Learning experience, hence the Learning Experience and Design team. So I think this definition still works though. If you just replace all the users with the L, learning experience is the process of creating learning solutions. And I would say instead of products, your learning solutions are the same thing, that provide meaningful and relevant experiences. I think all of my sizing's a little off, sorry about that. And a good UX person would have tested that first. But meaningful, relevant to me means it's effective for training, right? It's effectiveness. So today we're gonna go through a case study of how we kind of transformed our learnings to do that. So first, the challenge. There's too much to learn, too little time to learn it, and I have a very lean team, and very few resources, and a very dispersed audience, and a company of rapid growth. As of 2017, Uber is doing 15 million trips a day. My learner population went from 5,000 to 40, and it's just a wide, a lot to learn for such a little time. And new products coming out all the time, new things to learn, and new skills that need to be developed. The goal is to provide efficient and usable resources that help people everywhere learn how to do their jobs faster. I think that's something most people can relate to. Everyone's always trying to learn faster, especially with new skills that come up. So the strategy was, let's look at UX and see what best practices there, help you reduce that cognitive load and have that mindset to approach this kind of situation. If you think about your phones and your iPhones and other types of interactions that you have every day, you learn how to use them without somebody training you on it first. You just learn and it's quick, but it's a very complicated tool, but you know it. So how do we learn from people that do that? So I'm going to keep this very, very basic and practical for everyone. And hopefully simple enough that it's easy to understand. So one is empathy, knowing your learner. The second principle is consistency, so leveraging what people are already familiar with and staying consistent to that. 3, usability, does it actually work? 4, simplicity, just making sure less is more. And 5, agility, think, make, check. So we'll go through each one of these. First, going empathy. Does anybody know what that picture on the left is? What is that? So I heard it over here. An empathy map, yes. So empathy is knowing who your learner is, feeling what they feel, seeing what they see, and really understanding this. And the best way you can get empathy is to do user research. User research includes things like observations, focus groups, surveys, even recording interactions to see how they do things. So this is observing people on the job as well as in training. Are they falling asleep? Are they also on their phones and trying to sneak emails underneath the desk during the training? How many people do that? And what's actually happening and why are they doing it? So an empathy map actually really helps you understand the motivations there. So the lesson first was user research actually gives a better picture of the actual situation and not just your ideal situation. I think we often design for the ideal situation, and we also design for the trainer, right? Oh, the trainer's going to do this, they're going to say this, we're going to sit through the classroom. And what actually happens in reality does not play out in that way. So user research really helps that, and I would encourage, so we started doing this. I had my team go sit and watch how training actually unfolded. We designed it a certain way, and we go and watch, and it never really happened. You say it's going to take 20 minutes, it took 40 minutes. People have questions, then they focus on something that wasn't the point of the training at all. And we went there, and we also did focus groups to talk about it. We actually recorded people's computer screens to see how they were interacting with an e-learning and looked at where they were struggling and where they were getting stuck. And that would provide a lot of insight. We thought people would click on a button and keep moving along. Sometimes they couldn't find the button, and that was a barrier to learning. I think I saw a sign over in the other room, the non-conference room, that said 1 out of every 3, it was for a booth, 1 out of every 3 employees say that bad UX is a barrier to learning. I 100% agree with that. I don't know about the real numbers, but I agree with it. So this is an empathy map, and this is something I would really encourage when doing user research. So what this does is helps you really understand and get a big picture of who your target audience is, and filter it down to who exactly your audience is, so that you're not just designing for everybody, but designing for the learner. And what you might find out is that you might need 2 trainings, 1 for each type of learner that you have. And what do they say when you're watching them, when you're talking to them? They say things like, I'm stuck, how do I do this? Is it break yet? What time is lunch? I'm hungry. I like it when this X, Y, and Z happens. What do they actually do? Are they zoning out during the training? If it's an e-learning, how many people have played the e-learning in the background and then they did some other emails on the side while it played? Anyone? I do that, I've done that. Why? Do they quit and exit? Do they have to keep restarting their computer screen? Are they multitasking? Or is someone really participating live? If it's a live activity, why are they participating so much? What are they thinking? And this is the inferred part. So the other part you can observe and actually get real data for. What's inferred is, how much longer is this? I'm missing something. I don't understand what's happening. I just zoned out for the last 10 minutes. Where are we? But you can kind of see people doing that. And then how are they feeling? They might be overwhelmed. They might be frustrated. They might be really eager and want to learn. And from all of this, you can kind of develop a picture of their needs. They need something shorter, something self-paced, something interactive. They need more choice. Giving people a choice throughout a training helps them stay involved in the training. Insights. We learned about really bad Wi-Fi that happens in some places, and that we can't always rely on e-learning in those situations. There's a lot of poor UI. Things are hard to find, inconsistent, too long, too much information. So you take that map and you make a persona, and that really helps you design for a learner experience. This person represents who you're designing for. You create a profile for them and a story about them, and then you know them and you want them to succeed. So this is a nice template you can use. But there's so many different formats you can use. The important thing is to focus on things like what are their motivations, what is their background, what is their work history, and just give them a person that you can relate to. Consistency. So another really important concept is, we've noticed, of course we want to be consistent. How many people have actually done an audit of all of your training programs and can say confidently that they're very consistent? The style's consistent, the language, the tone, the colors. Every time there's a difference in consistency, somebody has to learn something new. They have to relearn your interface. They have to relearn the training, and that's adding cognitive load. And if they're busy learning how to learn and then having to learn the content, that's more than they need. That's really inefficient. So one tip here is following their mental models and something called Jacob's Law. What that means is people interact with things every day, and they kind of start developing mental models for how things should look. You should follow those and be consistent with those. Buttons are always this color, and when you hover them, they always turn gray. Consistent branding throughout. And something called the power law of learning. Has anyone heard of that before? If I explain it, you probably like, yeah, that makes sense. I've heard of that. So what that is, someone just gave it a fancy name. The power law of learning is just practice makes perfect. The more you do something, the more efficient you become at it. You learn from each experience and you become more efficient. And the goal in learning organizations is often how do you get people to that maximum learning faster. The interesting thing is if you actually plot it on a graph of the number of repetitions someone does, it follows a power law, and it's that shape on that graph. So what you want to do is follow, get to that maximum efficiency sooner. And you can see where repetitions happen. If you follow mental models that people already have, and you create this like familiarity in your training so that training 1 looked like training 10, then they've already repeated that kind of interface before or that interaction before. So you kind of cut that learning curve a bit. So the lesson is we made a style guide. We did the audit of all the trainings, and it was everywhere. Even the same designer might have made 20 trainings, and they were different by themselves. So implementing a style guide, but prioritizing it is another thing. Our learning style guide is always alive. It's constantly being updated every day. Every time someone notices something different and they have an idea, we still find differences and things that we can standardize after a year of this. So it makes it more training consistent. This gets really picky. I mean, you'll see everything about even your typography and what that should look like, what colors to use, what is the standards, what the layouts are, what the buttons look like when you hover over them. What if I had done this in my slide instead? Suddenly having something different, and it takes you a moment. I don't know if it took anybody a moment to kind of look at that and go like, what's going on here, what's happening? Now the places are in different things. It's great if you're trying to do something maybe in an advertisement or marketing, or you want one thing to stand out. Probably not as much when you're training on multiple topics. Usability. So usability is really about how intuitive something is. Do I know how to use it? How efficient is it? Can I use it quickly? And how satisfying? Do I like it? And what we focus on here is function over form. You can make something look really great, but if it doesn't work, doesn't really matter. Accessibility, can you find it? Because if you can't find it, you can't use it. And using user testing to make sure that it actually works the way. And not testing on yourself or your colleague or the person sitting next to you, someone that is truly your learner. Because what they do is not what people on your team will do. They will find every way to break something. So if I say using intuitive or recognizable design to keep learners focused on the task. So if I did this, which one would you click on? The top one, it's intuitive. It's surprising how many times though, if you looked at some e-learnings, they actually look like the bottom one because someone just didn't think about it. And now I have this moment, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds for the learner of trying to figure out what they're supposed to do next, sometimes longer. So this goes back to that Jacob's Law I was talking about. So I'm not a hyperlink. Lesson 2, something in the audit we found is if you have to give directions on how to take your training or your e-learning, it's not intuitively designed. That's a real screenshot from a real training that we had. I think I made it, so it was my fault, it was my failure. That tells you, and the rest of how to take this training, you're gonna follow these buttons. If I have to tell you that it was not designed intuitively. I would say the same thing if you're doing live trainings, is if you're spending a long time setting up your live training or how the activity runs or how to play the game, you've now spent too much time on how to play the game, and more learning is done on how to play the game than on the content. Modularity and microlearning makes it easier to move through a program and find the specific topic needed. So this really is about discoverability. We found that a lot of topics were found maybe in the middle of a training. It was like session 3 of one very long deck, or a third minute, 1 minute and 30 seconds into a video, but no one knew it was there. So was it usable? Was it effective then? No, because no one knew it was there. But if you break it down into microlearnings and really separate the files by what the specific learning objective or behavior is, people can find it. If they find it, they can use it. Simplicity. Less is more. I think this is, very obvious thing that we know. Be concise. What is all the things? Less is more. Concise is nice. Having very simple content as well. I think a lot of times we have a tendency to cram in information and content just because it's related, but it does nothing to do with the learning objective. And being really honest about that and getting rid of it is one of the hardest things, but I think that's something you have to have that mindset on your team to really uphold that. And then your visuals, all that clunkiness, all of the extra flashiness is not necessary. All this extra clutter doesn't make it more exciting or engaging, it's just distracting. So some lessons that we learned is plain language is not the same as dumbing it down. I think that people often think of it like that, but plain language is actually something you can get from a translations company. It's an offering. If I have a training in English, I went to a vendor and they offered to do plain English of my English training because, and it was an offering. And we realize is that plain English is, something where you have to get rid of all of that jargon and assumptions and also formal speaking. When you start talking about microlearning and the modern learner and the modern workplace, people are very casual. And casual conversation, when you hear it, is easier to understand than formal language. And if you look at some buttons from different interfaces, saying submit can be a little, even that word is a little obscure or abstract and vague, but being very specific on the button will help. So, and it's not dumbing it down because even very skilled readers have problems when they're rushed, tired, stressed. Most people when they're sitting in training get like that. And you probably, I'm not dumb, but if I'm really, really tired and someone's talking a lot, it will go over my head. So it's just really using that simple language. How many times have anyone seen things like that on a screen? Who's guilty of that? You can be honest. You don't have to answer me. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't we laughed, but we've all seen something like that before. I think everyone's probably even seen that stock photo at some point. How much value does that stock photo actually add to a slide? Not very much. It doesn't underline my a learning objective. It's just there to add some engagement. I don't know if the little stick figures are going to add engagement. I don't know if that means. So it's just distracting. Let's get rid of it, keep it simple. And along the same lines, just because a graphic designer likes it doesn't mean a learning designer or a UX designer will like it. They're not the same thing. It's not about being pretty or making it look good, but making it understandable. So just another quote I like is, simplicity is about subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. And this kind of goes on what I was talking about earlier, where we broke it down into that micro-learning and the little modules. Because when you do that, you end up with a lot of topics and a lot of content. That's actually overwhelming too. So a tip is just to chunk those things into groups of 5 to 9 items at a time, so it seems more manageable. People have a tendency to only remember about 7 pieces of information at a time, so just a tip. So finally, we get to agility. And this is really about being really iterative and testing often, testing a lot, prototyping, and then getting that feedback as quick as possible. This is a picture of what's called the lean UX cycle. And what that really does is help make the team iterate a lot more quickly and make that the center of your practice. So for example, You see a lot of user errors. People don't understand something. They don't know how to play the game. They don't know how to go through the e-learning. Most user error is probably a designer error. So instead of just saying, oh, they're just not doing it right, they just didn't get it, try to think about it from what did learning do to help them understand it better. And if it really is a true user error, then if it's just that one person, then is there a mechanism built in to help course correct them? I think I use this picture because oftentimes I've seen kind of like on a quiz or something, they say, you're wrong, try again. But was there any course correction there? It's kind of like when you get those errors that say, internal errors 2723, not found. Do you know what to do next? Do you know how to fix the problem? Probably not. So giving course corrections that are helpful in the design. Also testing throughout to make sure you're moving in the right direction. So the point of this is as you're going through your cycle, everything you do is to include that user testing and seeing how things actually play out in the real system. This is different than the I and the E and ADDIE. It's not just implementing and evaluating. This is doing a true pilot with the purpose of looking for what's wrong. The goal is to see what can go wrong and all the errors there. And going through that at all the points. So, in summary, so I'm trying to go through this quickly. These are the 5 topics I talked about and the themes here. We can go much more deeply on each one, and there's a whole other bunch of other principles you can talk about. But really, just to get started, something that I would encourage people to do when looking through and thinking about your programs and having that mindset is to adopt a UX mindset and encourage and have the teams foster these priorities. So I will leave you with a quote by Don Norman, which is, he's the father of UX, by the way, and invented and coined that term. It's everything that touches upon your experience with a product, and it might not even be near the product. Is there anything else? Thank you.